My name is Linda Strange, and this is my essay about my trip to Ukraine. It's called Whatever Happened to Igor. I don't pretend to know Ukraine well, but I have been there. I visited Kyiv in the winter of 1985, when I tagged along with the Russian department of Obo Academy on their annual excursion to the Soviet Union. Obo Academy, a small Swedish-speaking university in Western Finland, was always looking for additional people to accompany them on their trip to the Soviet Union. Most Finns didn't want to go. They had a long history with their eastern neighbor, much of it anguished. A particularly painful episode occurred in 1939, when the Finns, much like the Ukrainians today, found themselves fighting alone to keep the Russians out of their country. The Finns managed to hold out for 104 days against an army that vastly outnumbered them. Their resistance was so fierce that after their surrender, Russia didn't try to occupy them. 15 months later, the Finns tried to get some of that lost territory back. The continuation war lasted from 1941 until 1944. This war also ended in Finnish defeat. Finland's eastern borderlands were lost forever. Finland had to absorb the resettlement of 11% of her population. Finally, she had to pay onerous war reparations. She was also left in the uneasy position of being able to have a democracy in her own country, but having to watch her words and deeds when it came to anything outside of her borders. This uneasy state of affairs still prevailed when I lived in Finland in the 1980s. You had to be careful not to offend the Russians, but you didn't have to like them. The extra travelers who came with the Obo Academy Russian department to the Soviet Union were not Finns. Some were Swedish colleagues of the academy professors, some were Stockholmers, some were Americans, a 16-year-old exchange student, and myself. One young Stockholmer, Igor, had a Swedish mother and a Ukrainian father. Igor hadn't seen his father since he and his mother left Kyiv when he was 5 years old. Most of my fellow travelers, Swedes or Finns, were academic types. They were bookish, learned, published. Igor was not. He had left school straight after high school, gotten a job in a shop, and he spoke a brash, idiomatic South Stockholm Swedish that offended the tender ears of many of our professors. I remember the bus ride in from Kyiv airport through the snowy city streets. The driver, not understanding our Swedish chatter, was morose and silent until Igor stepped forward, sat in the front seat, and addressed the man in Ukrainian. The driver came alive, grew voluble. It turned out he was a passionate supporter of Dynamo Kyiv, and he and Igor smoked ferociously and discussed soccer the rest of the way to the hotel. We were staying at the Rus, so named for the ancient people from which the modern Russians take their name. It sat high on a hill not far from the main street, Kreshchatyk. Most of the students on the trip were elated to be visiting the Soviet Union. The reason for this was not political, but cultural, even emotional. The Finns might be fierce fighters and great patriots, but they were not known for their laughter or their jokes. The Finnish students who were attracted to Russian studies were also attracted to the celebratory nature of the Slavic culture, to its love of drama, both formal and personal, and to the passions that the Slavs find it unnecessary to keep bottled up inside. As soon as we got there, we made for Kreshchatyk to mingle with the crowds on the street. We went into a bar and ordered beer and smoked fish. I was with a girl who'd lived in Leningrad the year before, and she spoke outstanding Russian. We were alone only a few moments before a young man from another table approached. "Where were we from?" he asked. "Finland," we smiled. And so it went. People were friendly when they realized they could communicate with us. They were curious. We went everywhere, drinking, talking, laughing. The highlight of the trip, however, was Igor's reconnection with his father. Igor had come to Kyiv with only a phone number written on a tattered piece of paper. He made the call from a battered telephone box on a cold street off Krishatik. The person who answered wasn't his father, but confirmed that his father could come to the hotel the next day. Though this was encouraging, Igor still had the difficult task of convincing the hotel to issue his father an entrance permit. In 1985, the average Soviet citizen couldn't just waltz into a hotel where foreigners were staying. Cry if you have to, I remember saying to Igor as we stood in line to talk to the stern-looking woman with the magenta hair. I'm not going to cry. Igor was offended, though he did cry, as soon as he started to explain to the woman that he hadn't seen his father since he was 5 years old. She issued him the permit. We were all sure that she wasn't supposed to. That wouldn't have happened in Finland, I remember someone saying as we walked away. Nobody would have broken the rules for you. And if you'd started to cry, well, they would have just stared at you. But we were not in Finland. And the next day, Igor walked down the hill to see his father for the first time in 20 years. Later, I remember watching them sitting together at a table in the hotel dining room. Igor was very quiet and serious, like a little boy on his first day of school. It is Igor I think of now, as they fight in the streets of Kiev. Did he return to this city 6 years later when Ukraine achieved her independence? Did he try to make a life there? He would have been the perfect Westerner to succeed in the post-Soviet world. He spoke the language. He was business savvy. He had contacts. I wonder if he married a Ukrainian woman, put down roots, had children. Did he come home to Sweden when the children grew older? Did he stay there? Is he there right now, or is he watching as I am watching from the safety of a distant land, as the Ukrainians, like the Finns in 1939, are left to fight on their own? There is a saying in Russian that St. Petersburg is the head, Moscow the heart, and Kiev the mother of Russian cities. Kiev is where the culture began, where the Orthodox faith was assumed by Prince Vladimir in 988. Can the Russians attack their mother and get away with it? Can they survive the shame? 12 years after my trip to Ukraine, I moved to Russia for 10 months to teach English. My best friends were a couple with whom I have remained in contact for 24 years. When Russian troops crossed the Ukrainian border, my friends were shocked. They had not expected it to come to war. But they also were unable to believe that their government was lying to them. Our texts were careful, then tense, then they ceased altogether. It hurt me, but I hadn't been able to tell them what they wanted to hear. Have I lost my Russian friends to war, as I lost Igor to life? Maybe, but these are losses I can bear. Will the Ukrainians be so lucky? I hope so.